Good morning and welcome to Coffee with Mr. V again. And I'm here this morning to do public goods. So we were doing the whole market failures with externalities in previous episodes. Then we did a little shift of gears to talk about the price mechanism, because I've got a question from one of you about the price mechanism. But I want to come back to market failure now and just look at a different market failure, which is public goods. So in order to participate with Coffee with Mr. V, go grab yourself a coffee. Or if you don't like coffee, go and grab yourself a different liquid, put it in a cup, a mug, or a glass, come back to me, and then together we're going to do this synchronized sip, and that is going to be the best part of your day. So here we go, 1, 2, 3. I love coffee. So public goods need to be differentiated or differentiated from private goods. In order to do that, okay, I will talk about public goods having two main characteristics: the fact that they are non-excludable and non-rival. Now, these two things do mean different things. So in an exam, I think as an examiner, it would be a good question for me to ask, what does excludability mean and what does rivalry mean or rivalrous mean? And therefore really test, do you understand the difference between the two? So to very quickly then, excludability is all about whether or not people can have free access to the good once it's been provided. So if we're saying it's non-excludable, what we're saying is that even once it's been provided, even if I haven't paid for it, I can still access it. Okay? Excludability, on the other hand, means I can't access it for free. The only way I can access it, the only way I can consume it is if I pay for it. Okay, that's the difference there. Rivalry, on the other hand, doesn't say anything about paying for it or not paying for it. Rivalry is all about the idea of, if I consume one, does that affect your consumption? Can we both affect it at the same time? Or is there enough to go around that we can consume it? I can consume this product without affecting your consumption of the product. So technically, I think the definition would go something like, does one consumer's consumption of the product affect the utility gained by another consumer's consumption of the product? So if we talk about a private good there, when it's both rival and excludable, I would say something like a cup of coffee or a banana might be a very good example of that. So I can't just help myself to bananas from the supermarket. That would be stealing. I need to buy myself a banana. That's the only way I can have access to the banana, okay? That I have to pay for it. And then in terms of rivalry, if I'm eating a banana, well, that's one less banana for you. We can't eat it at the same time. It's definitely rival. Coffee, the same thing, okay? I can't just go to Starbucks and take a cup of coffee. I don't have free access to it. It's excludable. I have to pay for the coffee. And then when I'm consuming the coffee, you can't consume the coffee at the same time, all right? There isn't one for you now because it's empty, okay? But similarly, we couldn't consume at the same time. So that's why those two would fall into that quadrant. And what I'm doing here is I'm just building a table, okay, just to show you how these different concepts can work together. There is no market failure here. This is kind of market success, all right? So there is no market failure. We don't need to be concerned with the market failure of those products. There is no market failure. The free market works perfectly in terms of allocating resources to these products. Community surplus will be maximized to those products. So we don't need to come up with government intervention. On the other hand, public goods then are both non-excludable and non-rival. Now in class, hopefully you've got some good ideas about this. So something like flood defenses or street lighting would be good examples. Equally, you could have things like national defense, policing, lighthouses, possibly even something like fireworks as well, although that whether or not that is to market failure is debatable. But let's just go through it. So why are they non-excludable? Well, once a flood defense system is provided, it would be very difficult to then not allow somebody who hadn't paid for it to access it for free. And what I mean by that is, let's imagine you've got a village, okay, next to a river. Just bear with me a second. Here's the river, and then here is my flood defense system, basically just a wall around the village. If somebody stops paying for that, well, how do we exclude them from benefiting from it? What do we do? Do we break down the barrier and just say, there you go, right now your house can be flooded? I mean, once the barrier's been built, it's been built. So if people stop paying for it, or if somebody never paid for it in the first place, it still exists and that person can still get benefit from it. Similarly with streetlights, okay? Even though I didn't pay for the streetlight, if the streetlight is there, I can still consume the benefit from it for my benefit. Or in terms of the army, even though maybe I didn't pay my taxes and therefore I didn't contribute towards the army, if the army is there, then they're still going to defend me. Yeah, they're not going to step aside when the invaders come over and just say, right, okay, you can kill him. He didn't pay his tax. This doesn't work like that. Yeah, so that's why it's non-excludable. Similarly, it's non-rival because, well, you can see from that scenario that we had just then, everybody can benefit from flood defense systems at the same time. It's not like one person's benefit reduces the utility gained by other people's. And similarly, lots of people can consume the benefit from the streetlights at the same time. Lots of us can benefit from having a national defense system at the same time. So it's also non-rival. Now, the problem with being non-rival and non-excludable, the problem of a public good, is that it will lead to something called a free rider problem. So this is a market failure. So I put no market failure there. This one is a market failure. What will happen, because people can consume this product for free, they will try to. Why would you pay for something? Why would you contribute to something if you can get it for free anyway? So it's the fact that it's non-excludable. It's not so much the fact that it's non-rival, it's the fact that it's non-excludable, which is making this a market failure. It leads to something called the free rider problem. People do not want to pay to access public goods because they can access them for free. And because we're self-interested, we will access them for free. Well, if everybody wants to access it for free and nobody wants to pay for it, then there is no incentive for any producer to provide it. In economics, the only reason that a producer provides anything is for self-gain, for profit. If nobody wants to provide any money, if nobody wants to pay for it, then there is no profit, and therefore there is no production, and therefore there is no good. So the market failure, so we can talk about the free rider problem. And ultimately what that will mean is that there will be a missing market. Ooh, I spelled that wrongly. A missing market. The good won't be produced at all because no provider in the right mind will want to produce this good because there is no profit for this good. Just bear in mind though that, okay, this is all coming from the fact that it's non-excludable. So the way in which most public goods therefore are, the government intervention that fixes this market failure most of the time is some sort of compulsory tax system in which people pay tax, contribute towards tax, and then the government provides this. Hence the word public, because at the time this has to be provided by the public sector. Now, don't get those two meanings of the word public confused. Okay, public goods refer to non-excludable and non-rival, and they don't have to be produced by the government. Public sector goods provided by the government may be public goods in economics terms, but also the government of, say, a command economy may wish to produce coffee or bananas or private goods equally. So don't get those two different meanings of the term public confused. Okay, public goods in market failure terms just means non-rival and non-excludable. Fine. So does this always work? Well, you can go back to looking at previous episodes where we talked about public provision of goods sometimes leads to market failure in and of itself. It leads to over allocation of resources or under allocation of resources if the government didn't provide it particularly well. So sometimes in class I have a case study about policing in South Africa. So policing falls into this public goods bracket, but actually, most surveys in South Africa talk about how people are very unhappy with the state of policing because they don't believe that it's funded enough. And actually what you get in South Africa is, you particularly in gated communities, income inequality in South Africa, in those areas where people are there's a high concentration of high income households, they will actually pay for private security, okay? It may be just the individual household with their individual bodyguards, or they may have localized private security where there is a private security firm providing security for that gated community. So it might be that, for the 100 or so houses that live in a particular area, they all chip in and provide and pay for a private security firm to look after their own individual area. So that's the difference between public goods and private goods. And remember, it's the non-excludability that causes the market failure with public goods. Now, in A-level, in Edexcel A-level, you're only really doing public goods. But in the IB, you might also talk about common goods. Common goods, then, belong in this quadrant. They are non-excludable, but they are rival. So in class, we have talked about things like fishing in the sea, or kind of timber, trees in a forest. Let's have a look at why they're non-excludable. Well, in the scenario that there is no government intervention, okay, so free market at the moment, non-excludable because anybody can go into the fish and start fishing. They can consume fish. They don't have to pay to put their boat in the water. They just go on the water, they fish, and everybody can access those fish for free. However, they are rival in the sense that if I pull a fish out of the water and I consume it, sell it at the market, or just eat it for myself, that's one less fish for somebody else. Okay, well, I have successfully. If my utility, my consumption of the product has fundamentally affected the amount of utility that you can gain from that fish as well. In some textbooks, you might also see the idea of diminishability or non-diminishability, which again means that once I've consumed it, there is one less for you to consume. Trees in a forest or timber, again, without government intervention, anybody can just go into the forest with a saw and a truck, cut down a tree, and then load it on the back, and then do whatever they want to do with the wood. Maybe make it into some furniture, maybe just burn it as fuel, whatever it might be. But if I cut down a tree, it is rival. That means you can't cut down the same tree. My consumption of that product has fundamentally altered the utility you can gain from that product because there is one less for you. You cannot consume that product. So that's why they're rival. This leads to a market failure as well. The market failure that we talk about for these particular products is something called the tragedy of the commons. In the IB, they talk about the unsustainability of common access resources. Very technical way of saying. Basically, what it would mean is that you will eventually overuse these products to the point of extinction. Because if there is no limit to how many we can consume, but every time we consume, there is one less for someone else, essentially we're going to run out. We're going to exhaust this resource altogether. And you can see that. With fishing, we talk a lot about extinction. With forests, we talk a lot about deforestation. It's unsustainable. So how do we fix this market failure? You need to somehow think about moving it from the non-excludability column into the excludable. You need to fix the excludability issue. And one of the ways that the governments do this is they essentially extend private property rights to some part of the population that they now have legal ownership of those particular resources. In the case of the Amazon rainforest, the Brazilian government has given over private ownership of different parts of the Amazon rainforest to local areas. Now, those local areas can charge a price for logging companies to go in. That has made it excludable. people can no longer go into the Amazon rainforest and start cutting down trees unless they have paid a price, and that's made it excludable. In terms of fish, you have to now buy a fishing license. Unless you buy a fishing license, you do not have free access to the sea. In this case, it's the government or a department of the government, the fisheries department, that has the private ownership of the seas and the rivers in the UK. Now, of course, people try to break these rules all the time. You will often see people fishing in the rivers around Oxford and beyond. A lot of the time, that's illegal. They're not meant to be doing that. They're meant to be having a license. Sometimes they might have a license if they've bought one, but sometimes it's illegal. So it's not to say it never happens, but that at least is the government intervention that is in place to try and fix the common good problem. Over here is something called club goods. Now, there is no reason why anybody in the A level or the IB specifications need ever study club goods, all right? But this is things like Netflix, Wikipedia. Actually, Wikipedia is a bad example because you don't have to pay to go into Wikipedia. If anything, Wikipedia belongs in this quadrant over here. Another one might be golf clubs, hence the term club goods, or cinemas. So the idea for these then is that you have to pay, but once you've paid, you can consume the product at the same time as other people. But again, one person's consumption of the product doesn't affect anybody else's consumption of the product. So why are these good examples? Netflix, okay, once I've paid for a Netflix subscription, I can consume a movie, but you can consume that movie at the same time. And both of us watching that movie in different places doesn't affect each other's consumption. Golf clubs, I have to pay to get on the golf club. It's not free for me to access the golf club. I have to pay to get on it. But once I'm on the golf course, you can consume the golf course at the same time. I could be on hole 1 and you can be on hole 2. And somebody else could be on hole 18. All right, we're all consuming the golf course at the same time. And it doesn't affect each other's utility. Cinemas, same detail. I pay for a ticket. I can't go in the cinema unless I've paid for a ticket. But once we've all paid for tickets, we all have our allocated seats, we can all consume the movie at the same time. My consumption of the movie doesn't affect your consumption of the movie. There is no market failure here. So again, just to make the point, it's the excludability or the non-excludability issue rather that causes the market failures. It's not so much the rivalry, it's the non-excludability aspect. Okay. Now, the only other point that I would bring up in the remaining time that I've got left is that this isn't a perfect science and these goods don't always stay in their quadrants all of the time. So for example, where would roads fit? Well, at the moment, if I get in my car today and go down the street, well, it's non-excludable in the sense that I don't pay a toll. Okay, I can just jump in my car, I can use it, or I can cycle down it, or I can walk on it. All right, it's non-excludable, it's free. It's also non-rival in the sense that I can consume the road, but somebody else can consume the road at the same time, and we don't affect each other. But on the other hand, certain roads can be excludable. And depending on how deep you want to dig into this, it's not truly non-excludable. I do have to pay road tax every year. I do have to contribute to the upkeep of the road. So potentially it's not that non-excludable either. Is it truly non-rival? Well, it depends. It depends on the actual overall consumption of the product. And this is true for a lot of these things. It's also true for things like golf courses. It's also true for things like Netflix and Wikipedia. If lots and lots of people are using things at the same time, then actually my consumption of it is starting to affect your consumption of it. In terms of road, you get traffic and traffic jams. My consumption, my utility gain from a road is very much reduced if there's lots of other people on the road at the same time. Yeah, traffic jams are rubbish. Golf courses, well, they can get too crowded. Swimming pool, public swimming pools as well, could get too crowded. Cinemas, I actually really hate it if the cinema is 100% full. All right, it's noisy, people are eating nachos, and that bothers me. It's very loud, so that bothers me as well. So cinemas aren't great. Wikipedia, if everybody's on Wikipedia at the same time, if everybody's on Netflix at the same time, there is a potential that it might crash. So sometimes we can blur the line really here between is it truly non-excludable or truly, sorry, I was really talking about here. Is it really rival or non-rival, okay? And this is where you might get in some textbooks them talking about quasi-public goods. So it behaves a lot of the time as a public good, but when there is truly overuse, when lots and lots of people are using the good, actually it might start behaving more rival, and therefore it's starting to move into that top row, and therefore we would call it a quasi-public good. I don't think quasi-public goods are at all mentioned in either the IB or the A-level spec, but there it is. If it does turn up in a textbook, you now know what it means. All right, that finishes the session. So again, thank you very much for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Take care and stay safe.